authorities keep reminding the public, remain calm and don't panic. But it looks like there isn't much heeding of this call, as evidenced by the frantic buying of face masks and disinfectants and the virulent spread of false information on social media. How do we deal with our fear in the face of a public health emergency, such as a 2019 novel coronavirus outbreak? Well, we have in the studio right now Psychologist Ronald Del Castillo, a clinical psychologist. Good morning, Ronald. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, good to have you on the show. Now, isn't it normal to feel fear in the face of a global disease outbreak?
Oh, absolutely. I think we feel anxious and fearful, and that can lead to us being more hypervigilant. Maybe we'll wash our hands more. We'll listen to the DOH and the WHO more in their advisories. I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's all right. I think the panic, however, is when our reactions, including our attitudes and behaviors, are clearly out of proportion to the threat that is before us.
All right. So how do we differentiate this healthy fear from panic?
Well, I think a panic is where our attitudes and behaviors are, again, out of proportion to the situation, and more recently, where we target certain groups, including Chinese people, where we equate the virus to Chinese people, where we don't distinguish Chinese people as individuals, but rather there's a direct line between virus and Chinese people.
Right, and that is really unfortunate, and we're seeing stories, true or false, on social media about this issue. So on one hand, it is kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, to have certain conceptions about Chinese people, but we also know, that's not right, that's not fair, it's not even factually accurate to fear all Chinese people. But what can we do about that?
I think one thing that we can do is to stick to the facts that is delivered out there by the WHO, by the DOH, to listen to those advisories. And in some ways, we've been here before. Xenophobia and panic was on the rise during the SARS virus in 2003. And so I think to remind ourselves that this is part of a sort of a broader context that we've been to before is one way to try to minimize that kind of anti-Chinese sentiments.
All right, now back to this whole issue of panic.
Yeah.
How does panic actually inflict harm on the person who is panicking and to the people around that person and the rest of the community?
Well, I think, as I'm sure everybody knows, that panic feeds into misinformation, disinformation, fake news that's out there, which is not helpful to any of us. Like, for instance, there's some reports coming out of South Korea where this coronavirus is supposedly coming from a biochemical weapons facility. Another report from Australia is where fortune cookies and rice are contaminated because they came from China. So that kind of disinformation is not helpful to me, to you, or to anyone in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Right. On a personal level, if we are panicking, what do we do to deal with that?
Well, I think, again, stick to the advisories, the regular and transparent advisories of the WHO and the DOH. I think they've been very good about being transparent and giving us those kinds of information. I personally would minimize exposure to social media. I think we get a lot of our news from social media, which makes total sense, but get enough of the update and then move on with your day instead of focusing so much on it. And a lot of that is misinformation.
Absolutely. Just to show you how panicked, or I don't want to say panicked, but maybe overly concerned people are. At my children's school, they have a haircut inspection every first Monday of the month. And the parents were telling the school to call it off because they didn't want to bring their kids to the barber and have them sit in a chair. I mean, and that's a little over.
Yeah, I think that's an example of, again, targeting groups or an overly panic where it's not really based on the actual threat before you. Again, it's understandable to be anxious and to be fearful. That makes total sense. But then eventually it gets into this space where our behaviors are discriminatory or are unreasonable to the actual situation.
All right, how can the government be more encouraging for calling for common sobriety?
I think the government has been doing a good job in giving us some transparent information and regular updates. I think those have been very good in making sure that we get the right facts. I think, again, unfortunately, I think one of the challenges for the government is a lot of the information is outside of their control, especially the internet and especially social media. And so I can understand why that's a hard balance for our health officials and administrators out there. Yeah.
All right, we have more to talk about. Our conversation with psychologist Ronald Del Castillo continues later in the program. We'll also talk about the outrage and misunderstanding on social media spurred by alleged racist attitudes towards Chinese citizens. And a CNN exclusive look inside Macau as the gambling mecca turns into a ghost town amid the coronavirus outbreak. This is the Newsroom on CNN Philippines. We'll be right back.
Life can be full of surprises, so save with a bank that can surprise you. Open an ING savings account and get 4% interest rate per annum. That's 16 times more interest than other retail banks. No minimum balance, no lock-in period. Save for a brighter future. Download the app, save more today. ING.
You're back in the newsroom, and we're still with psychologist Ronald Del Castillo. Earlier, we talked about dealing with fear and panic amid the 2019 novel coronavirus outbreak. Another issue that we are being made aware of when the outbreak emerged is racism. So, Ronald, by definition, what is racism and what are the examples of racist behavior?
I think racism is where we are discriminatory towards people, really based on racial, ethnic, and cultural identity. I mean, for this particular virus, for instance, there's been a report where a woman in France was called dirty, and she's Vietnamese. You know, an Australian student in Australia, you know, he felt sort of odd that people were looking at him funny in public transportation, and he's of Chinese descent, but he's Australian. So these kinds of behaviors is an outgrowth of that panic that's coming out of this virus.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. But again, what is the difference between taking proper precaution and being racist?
Yeah, that's
a very fine line.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to distinguish between fear that is reasonable versus discrimination that is clearly about race and ethnic identity. So I acknowledge how difficult that is, but I think there is an actual difference, and that is for targeting groups. For me, if we step back a bit, it's important to understand that our anxiety and fear around this is part of a broader tension, if I can be frank. Mm-hmm. It's part of a broader tension we have had with China for the last few years. Right. An example of that is the maritime disputes, right? There have been a lot of supposed reports of rude Chinese tourists, or that they are opening up too many businesses in the city, or they're moving into our neighborhoods. These kinds of attitudes is part of that long line that's been happening in the last few years. And this coronavirus, again, feeds into that sort of racial bias that is happening. Yeah.
Right, so it's not just happening on the back of this coronavirus.
Yeah.
It's built up over the years.
Yeah.
as you've said. But how is this behavior harmful? You know, you have the instinct to want to protect yourself and protect your community, but again, at the end of the day, you don't want to be racist.
Well, it's harmful for all of us because we also know that people who are singled out or targeted as the cause of this virus are also the same people who are less likely to seek medical care, right? Especially in the context of this particularly new virus, where apparently, it can spread prior to the symptoms showing up. So when we target people, they're less likely to get medical care, and that's unfortunate. Another consequence I think that's important is, again, if we step back, this sort of panic and anxiety we have comes at the heels of the controversy around Denvaxia, which was 2 years ago, which was linked to low confidence in vaccinations, which is linked to low immunization, which we know is linked to the measles outbreak that was I believe just a year ago.
Right.
So with this particular virus, in a few months' time, our experts out there will develop vaccines for this particular virus. But given that there's a history of low confidence among our fellow Filipinos about the vaccines and skepticism about the government and skepticism towards science and research and experts, when the vaccine is developed for this virus, how confident can we be that our Filipinos here will trust that vaccine? And so that's an unfortunate link that is also happening now.
Right. So interesting to see how all these events, are linked together and affect each other. So, I mean, it doesn't help that social media is being flooded with all these stories, again, fake or not. How do we deal with that? Should we just stay off social media completely?
No, I think it's not realistic to get out of social media. I think social media is part of our life. We know, for instance, that millennials and Gen Z in particular get most of their news from social media and no longer traditional news. So one way, if you're the kind of person who likes to post, which I think most people do, I invite you to pause for a second and ask yourself, are you posting or sharing this particular piece of information in order to help the public, to educate the public, or are you posting it in order to create visibility for yourself, or in order to create drama, which is really what social media is about.
Some people love the drama.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think yesterday I just saw, for instance, people sharing the news about the bird flu coming out of Hunan province. So my question is, why share that information? One would think, oh, I'm sharing that information to let people know about another potential virus that's going on. But I have a hard time believing that. For me, I think that some people repost those kinds of things in order to generate yet another fodder or see what's happening in China. See, they're not doing their job and responsibility. Yeah.
Right, right. And also, I saw something on social media, the same story about a Chinese man and his children getting in an elevator, and it was reposted by many, many people as if it was their own firsthand experience, right? So people really need to pause and think about what they're going to post.
Yes.
Okay, we can only really monitor ourselves at the end of the day. What can we do to keep our behaviors in check, and how do we put greater emphasis on empathy rather than fear?
Yeah, I think again, taking a pause, reflecting on why you're doing the behavior that you're doing, stick to the facts, stick to the DOH and WHO as much as possible. Get your updates, yes, from the news, including social media, but then move on with your day. Go to work, go to school, and don't be so consumed with this kind of sort of drama and wish for visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Just go on living, your life, wash your hands.
Yes, absolutely.
Boost your immune system and, keep calm. All right, we really do appreciate you being here this morning, Ronald Del Castillo. It's a pleasure. Thank you.